Hey, folks, welcome back to Crypto Heartbeat. It is Friday. Once again, it's Stephen Friday, but it's also John Friday. This is a really exciting and special episode. Since Steve passed, which was right after episode 37, I really felt like the Lord was saying, hey, continue to do this and bring on guests. And so I'm really excited about today. We're going to do a little clip from Steve at the beginning here, and then we're going to welcome in someone I admire significantly, and you'll hear about that in the intro of John. But I just want to welcome you back. What's been amazing about this journey of doing Right Side Up for now the 48th episode is the fact that it started out very, very small. I mean, I think we had 6 or 7 people in at the beginning, and in the last couple episodes, we've had over 170. And that's just been really encouraging. The content and the interaction, I think the style and approach, this isn't some, we this isn't a curriculum, right? It's guys who love Jesus going, hey, how do we do this? How do we do this together? And to have a lot of things that, are just amazing nuggets of wisdom. And whether you're somebody who's following Jesus, listening to his voice, or you're like, hey, what's this stuff all about? There's always, I believe, something in it for you. And I hope it's something that blesses you because that's why we did it. And the core whole reason that I said, Steve, let's do this first episode together. And that's what started Right Side Up, was this idea that every time I talked to Steve, he would say to me, hey, Matt, don't trust me. Go ask him yourself. And what's amazing about that is it was so refreshing because I had experienced so many people kind of telling me, I've got all the answers. You need to listen to me. This is human people, men. And here's a guy who goes, you know what? Jesus is alive and he speaks. Why don't you go ask him yourself? And what's so amazing is the one of the concepts that Steve talked about so often, he said, the truth is probable. The truth is probable. What does that mean? It means the truth is always the truth. And no matter how many questions you throw at it, it still remains to be the truth. And one of the ways you can identify when you're approaching things that are untrue is that they won't allow you to probe them, will not allow you to ask questions. And so much of my experience, certainly around kind of a cultural Christianity, is one of no nos. Well, you can't talk about that. Well, hang on a second. Do we believe that Jesus is accessible? Absolutely. But is presented oftentimes as someone who is a historical figure who's dead. And what has been amazing about this is understanding and engaging with a living, moment by moment Jesus. And what's so cool about this is John Manwell, who's going to be coming here in a little bit, I know has a lot to say there. And his journey is really just an example. And that's really what we're trying to do. Is so many of the times people have a popular culture understanding of what does it mean? What is this thing that we're doing? And what are the implications of it? And so I'm super excited to have a voice come in as a guest and to speak into this because we always learn something, and I'm so curious to understand. Hey, John, how do you do this? Your life, you got ups and downs and all these things. How should we see these things? And what's so cool is to have this framework of understanding that Jesus is alive and he speaks, and it's like, all right, I'm with you. Let's hold every thought captive and let's see where this amazing journey goes. But, folks, let's say hello to you, and then we will get into a short clip with Steve that I just want to share with you because I think it sets this up really, really well. Mike Ostel can't be here today, but he still is number one going to the VA for scans. Thanks so much for being here, Mike. Sam Kemp, what's going on? Dan McMillan, thanks, guys, for supporting all of this. Enox and Carter Hill, what's up, Carter Hill? I know, actually, that Carter Hill has seen John. John was a guest, just like Steve was, at our Generosity Conference. John is from the UK. He's in Liverpool, and he came in as one of our featured speakers in the Generosity Conference. And so, Carter, you got a chance to hear from John that day that you were in Gen Con. Dan, thanks so much for being here, man. We're just continuing to share this. I feel like, Jesus has made it very, very clear that this is the lowest common denominator, right? It's the creation and understanding how we engage with Jesus as we rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. And what does that look like? Man, I'll tell you, the implications are amazing. And you're going to hear terms like kingdom today. What does it mean to be a kingdom person? What is that? It's kind of weird, right? What does that mean, the kingdom? We're going to talk to John about that today as well. Enoch, thanks so much for being here. And then Ego Foundation, right? Together with, on the other channel, just had some insight from the Lord yesterday around Romans 9:1. And I drilled into the Greek word for conscience, right? Your conscience, let your conscience be your guide. And as I drilled into the actual Greek term, the definition was together with. And of course, Ego Foundation knows this so well, this idea of what is life like with Jesus, moment by moment. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But let's jump into this little clip from Steve, because I always want to have a clip from Steve, because I tell you, every time I prepare for Right Side Up, I just like something blows my mind. And so I want to share this with you. This is from, let's share the screen. This is from episode number 36. So this is the one episode before Steve passed. And we were talking about the church, and I had some questions and some kind of frustrations, I guess. And here's what Steve had to say.
I mean, think about this for a minute. I mean, just pause, and without throwing any stones, just asking questions. Okay, Christianity is billed as the only true religion. Now, the people who believe that, I was one, believe that with all of my heart, honestly, with integrity, because I believed it was the very gift that God had given to us, that we are Christians and we are the light of the world that God has put in place. Okay, fair enough. Without going to the Bible yet, just looking at, okay, then if we are the light of the world, what is the light that we are sending to the world? Well, at last count, that there are about 60,000 different views on what that light looks like. And every one of those views says they're the truth. Wow, Jesus, is that what you had in mind? Is that what you were thinking about? That there would be, as of this date, about 60,000 different views of what that light looks like. And what does now that light do with the other portions that are claiming to be light? Well, each of those lights pretty much says that the other forms of those sort of claiming to be light are not only wrong, but they're error, they're deception, and they're the lie. Well, wait a minute, I thought you said you were the light. Whoa, Jesus, something has gone haywire here. What is it that has gone haywire? Well, Steve, where did you get the idea of associating yourself as a Christian, of declaring yourself to be a Christian? Where did that come from? You see what begins to happen? When you learn, you don't approach things from a standpoint of accusation. You start approaching things from the standpoint of inquiry. Something isn't right here. Now, by way of example, one of the Old Testament, what we call Old Testament stories, was when Samuel, who was the last of the prophets to rule Israel, the people started to cry out for a king, like the other nations around them had. They weren't satisfied with Jehovah being their king. They wanted a man to be their king. And so Samuel was really bummed out about that. And there was a lot of stuff that Jehovah said, but part of the conversation was, first of all, Samuel, you have to realize that they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Mm. Here's the other thing you need to realize. The people do not reflect the king. The king reflects the people. So when you see a Bill Clinton, you see the people who have said, that's who I want. When you see a George Bush, in our country in particular, when you see a Barack Obama, when you see a Donald Trump, when you see a Joe Biden, the people are not a reflection of them. They are a reflection of the people. So now let's go back at this practical part that you and I have talked about a lot of times. Why is it important that I learn to live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God? Because when I remove the barriers between him and I, and then start learning how to rule my life with him, and then from my life to the life of my family, and then from the life of my family to the life of my relationships and my work, it becomes that like that parable that Jesus said about the leaven that leavens the whole lump of dough. It begins to spread and permeate. And what begins to then happen? The leaders will then start reflecting the people. What will happen to all the systems that are then being operated by those leaders? They will start changing the dynamic of how they are operated and the intention for which they are operated. No longer does it become, when our life becomes in alignment with him, in this unbroken relationship, where I learn to live by every word that proceeds out of his mouth, where I learn how to hear his voice, when I learn how to sit with him in heavenly places, when I learn how not to react to it, to proact, when I learn to live the way he designed life to be lived. And all of a sudden, all of these instruments and tools that are designed to help us are no longer there to exploit us and to extract and enslave us. They then become instruments of service for us. That's how it's designed to work. You know? So, hey, I don't know about you. I want to learn how to do that.
You know, a little nugget before we bring John in. You know, what's amazing is what's been so transformational in my life, right? 23 years of doing this, right? Saying, hey, I'm following Jesus. And over the last, 2.5 years, really understanding this basic premise. You know, here's Jesus. He comes out of the wilderness, right? He's tempted by Satan. And what is he? You know, he's like, bow before me, right? Give me your authority. And what does Jesus say? He's like, well, Satan says, hey, I know you're hungry. Turn these stones into bread. And what does he say? Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And you think about the things that Jesus said. I only do what I see the Father doing, right? And then you think about things like faith comes through hearing. And then Peter, James, and John go up the Mount of Transfiguration, and they see literally Jesus transfigured with Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets, and they're conferring. What are they conferring? They're talking. And you think about this. They wanted to like make them equals, make Jesus equal with the law and the prophets. And what ends up happening? A voice from the sky. You talk about like interrupting, you know those scenes from movies where they walk into the bar and you're like the wrong person to walk into the bar and the record player goes and everybody turns and looks at you. This voice from the sky says, "This is my son. Listen to him." And then when the Spirit, the Holy Spirit is given, right? He's like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to send you one. He's a counselor. And guess what he's going to do? He's going to remind you of everything I said. Jesus is alive and he speaks. And it's amazing to me how my life has transformed when moment by moment I've understood now holding each thought captive and then realizing the nuance of where that direction, that guidance comes from, and then what the gift is. Now I am understanding why consider it pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds. Why? Because there is a shepherd. We recognize his voice. He's out front. And it's amazing to think he's accomplishing what he's planning to accomplish. So I want to listen to him and say, hey, what's next? What do we got? And there's no one I know that does that more than John Manwell. Folks, I want to welcome John to Right Side Up. What's up, John? How are you, sir?
Good to see you. Good to be with you. Yeah, doing well, thank you.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you back. You were on with the Gen Con conference. You came in from Liverpool. You're in the UK. You're a man who I think probably the most number of conversations that I've had with Michael and our family is with you around this idea of the kingdom and kingdom businesses. And, that's something that you and Steve, even though you never got a chance to meet Steve, was at the very top of mind. He believed that business and the structure of where we spend the majority of our life in this construct of business is one of the greatest places in which we essentially contribute and walk with Jesus in building the kingdom. I know that's close to your heart and such. And I just want folks to know you because you've made a huge impact on my life, and I'm just appreciative for your time to come in and bring value to, well, 50 people right now, and it continues to grow. So, John, welcome.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's great to be with you, and I always enjoy talking with you. You've got a gift, of pulling things out of people that they weren't planning to say or weren't at the top of their mind. And I think that, honestly, I think that's why people are enjoying your podcasts. And that's why, I mean, I've not done this with you before, but I've sat with you and we've talked about things. And before I know it, you've got me thinking about things I haven't thought about for years, or fresh thoughts are coming to my mind. And, I think that's actually part of your gift as an innovator. You help bring ideas out of other people as well. And I really appreciate that about you.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. And, I know you've been a longtime friend of the family, and have, we've kind of walked in, tandem in some respects. I've been kind of a bit more distant. Tell folks what you do and kind of how, because I know your life is really what I would consider to be truly integrated with Jesus. And can you kind of talk about that? Because I don't feel like your work defines you. I don't feel like it's like you seem more of a seamless person to me than somebody who's siloed.
Well, that's kind of you to put it that way. I think sometimes I feel fragmented, doing a bit of this and a bit of that. And one of my colleagues once described me as a Swiss Army knife. And, he was complimenting me, saying, we got all these different blades and tools that can do this, that, and the other. And I reminded him, have you ever tried using any of those tools? It really makes you want to reach for the real tool, the real screwdriver, the real blade. But my life, and Mari and I live here in Liverpool. Our life is diverse. I think it's a nice way to put it, and I really want it to be true that it's integrated. At the core of what we believe is that there is one God, and he treats us as a person, and he doesn't see compartments in our lives like, oh, John, your work's going really great. Now I'll work on your family. I think he sees those as integrated, and part of lining up with God and his purposes is recognizing he's already looking at things as integrated. It's us that fractures them and builds little compartments like, well, I'll dress smart on a Sunday and I'll show up at my friend's house in scruffs. And, this is a wrong mentality. What's motivating those? I'm not saying you have to dress up smart to go to church, but you know what I mean? We can have compartments. We always used to joke the most tense time and the time that we were all the most irritated with each other is running 5 minutes late for our church meeting on a Sunday morning. No one's being gracious. And what are we doing? We're on our way to worship the one true living God who's ultra gracious. And so we can be very fractured and incomplete. But I think being inspired by God in the very purpose and reason for being alive permeates everything you do. And, I would say that like when we go to sleep, I pray every night that God would speak to us while we sleep. I want to hear him speak to me while I'm asleep, because I don't think he switches off and says, right, okay, thank goodness, John's asleep now. He's not causing trouble. We can turn our attention to those guys in Asia who are just waking up. He's with me, and he wants to inform me and tell me things in dreams. And when I wake up, he wants to give me a starting thought for the day. And my work is my place of engaging with people and earning a living and having a meaningful contribution to the planet. My home is my base and sanctuary, and where I have the greatest influence with my family. And the other things I do, like connecting with people like you and the Christian business network that we've started, they're all the same. And, that's, I think, why Paul, when he's talking to, Timothy, is basically saying, if elders need to be good stewards in their home, otherwise they're not fit to be elders. In other words, you can't lead out in the religious environment, the so-called spiritual environment, or church, as some people think, and have a chaotic home. So that's not so much a prohibition as a reminder that we are integrated. And if you don't recognize it, you can't be in a mess in one department of your life, one aspect, and expect to sail well in the other part. So yeah, we have a community that lives in our home, have done for 35 years. So we've just, what does that mean? I mean, it means we just invite people to live with us. And half the people don't want to come and live with us, but some people have to because they're in dire straits. Some people think it would be great to come and live with us and realize it's not just one big happy holiday home. There's work to be done. Someone's got to put the bins out, the trash, and someone's got to wash the dishes. We got a little poster above our kitchen sink which says, "Everybody wants a revolution, but nobody wants to wash these dishes." And life means you got to do some work. So we live as a community in that sense, basically in its extended and open family. And I see work as part of life and an opportunity to make a difference, not just earn a salary. And I think we're created as ambassadors of peace, relationship repairers, and members of society. We're not separate from so-called society. So it's diverse, hopefully integrated.
Well, one of the questions I have, I remember the first moment I met Steve, I asked him I told him, I said, the Lord has asked me to unlock generosity by giving. And he said, I'm called to men of the transfer. That's what he said. Like one of the first things I ever said, he's like, I'm called to men of the transfer. And of course, it took me 2 years to understand what he meant. The Lord has spoken to you, and it was potentially continues to, obviously, nightly. But there's also a trajectory, and I feel like you've shared with me, and I would love for you to share with the audience. When we talk about calling or direction or purpose, would you share yours? Because it is really a unique story, in my opinion, and I think it also can be really informative to many of the folks in our community who are going, why am I even here? Like, how do I even understand what my purpose is? And, you guys talk about like Jesus telling you, like, how does that work? And how does it manifest itself over 35 years, John?
Okay, well, I don't have a neat little quote elevator pitch to say this is what I'm about, like Nike or whatever. I think at the heart of who I am and what I believe is that God made us each intentionally and for a purpose. And so I'm compelled and excited and probably constrained. I don't often think about the constraint side of things, but empowered and enthused by the belief and understanding that God's got a specific purpose for me. That doesn't mean everything's mapped out and I can just sit back and say, que sera, sera, because God will sort it out. I think he's called me to be a connector of people and to primarily open up the kingdom of God to people. Now, I know you mentioned in the preamble and when you were talking earlier about this word kingdom, and I think a lot of people stumble on that. It's like in many circles, it's the modern word for church. And I would say absolutely not. I would prefer this way, and this is what I say defines my life. Kingdom of God is where the king is ruling, not any king, because it's not any old kingdom. Where the king Jesus, the king of the universe, is ruling, that's the kingdom of God. And so he has a purpose. My goal is to line up my life with him. I believe that God wants us to have relationship with him, not find out what the rules are. Pretty soon we learn that the main rule is listen to him and obey him, which is primary thing I took away from Steve's talks and his whole approach to life. Like he would say to you, well, Don't take my word for it. Ask him. I mean, Jesus is real. And if you genuinely ask him, he genuinely answers. He doesn't necessarily answer the next day in written form, but he has a habit of, when he's asked sincerely, he does answer because he's a real person. And that's my experience. So the king, this is the earth-shattering truth. The king of the universe is not only willing, but eager to engage with each and every one of us on an individual basis. How could he possibly do that? When you do the numbers, given I struggle to remember the names of the people in my immediate circle, it doesn't fit. But he is God and I'm not. And so our calling, Mari and I got married 36 years ago. And really immediately when we prayed, okay, Lord, what are we to do with our life? You know, this is an example of him saying, okay, I heard you. Here's the answer. And we knew that when we asked him, we were saying, Lord, what will we do with our lives? And sincerely, Lord, we will do whatever you tell us. And you're secretly hoping, I hope it's not this, or this. But you know also that you hear these stories of people saying, I really, really don't want to do this. And that's almost like telling the 4-year-old learning to ride a bike, whatever you do, don't cycle into that tree. It's on your mind for a reason, and you're going to cycle into that tree. So I remember saying to Mari when we prayed that prayer back in 1987, we have to be sincere. And if the Lord's taking us to do something that we really have on our do not want to do bucket list, then we have to be sincere and say, okay, well, God will make it for good. So I can remember thinking that. I had certain thoughts like, I really, really don't want to be a missionary, you know, living in poverty in India, just for example. And anyhow, so I think we prayed that prayer sincerely, and I think God immediately answered. Within weeks, he gave us, through a sequence of things I maybe won't take time to go into now, but really clearly, systematically over the next few weeks and then months, leading words, dreams, visions during prayer, scriptures that just absolutely all aligned. And he told us to move from London, big expensive city where we had a 1.5 bedroom apartment above a meat shop. And he led us to buy a big old, in need of much renovation, Victorian house, 3-story house in Liverpool, with the vision to have people live with us. Part of that vision was to have children that would live with us. We soon filled it with our own children. And then God said, well, buy the next door neighbor house, which we did. And each of those steps required faith. You know, I resigned from my job in London without having a job to go to. We bought the house in Liverpool. Everyone thought we were crazy. My colleagues at work literally asked me if I was having a nervous breakdown. And well, God proves himself. So we bought our neighbor's house. So we started with a 7-bedroom house that needed a lot of maintenance and repairs in 1988. We bought our neighbor's house, which was another 7 bedrooms, joined the two together in 1998. And in 2015, we bought a similar house directly opposite those two. And that's meant people can come and stay with us. And I'd love it. I'd love it if one of the outcomes of this call was that someone I don't know came to stay with us.
Wow.
But, you know, let's see. I'm wary of going out on the internet and offering an open invitation. If they get a double green tick from Matt Frazier, then
there you go.
Welcome. So we'll see how that goes. But that's what we've been doing. And of course, we filled it with 4 children. Then we had other people, and having all these extra rooms meant we could start to have people to come visit that other people just simply couldn't do, like a family of 6 that was made homeless through a series of job and house sale circumstances, came to live with us for a year. And another family needed to sell their house, so they needed to grab the buyer while the going was good. They moved in for a year, not at the same time. So we've had 3 families of 6 over the years, and numerous missionaries that have used us as a base, people coming out of different abuse situations, I mean, we're not saints. We're difficult to live with, I think. I think I'm difficult to live with, but my children and wife have stuck with me. And it's mostly been fun. We've had some really difficult people. We've had people that have, when they finally moved out, we just stood in the hallway and cried because it was so hard. And but that's given us a sense of God's heart for his household, that he puts up with difficult people in his household, and yet he's still king, and the king is still king and ruler of the household. So it gives us a little insight into, how can you be in the kingdom and still sinful? Well, the father of the household will put up with some stuff because he's seeing the longer picture. My child breaks something in a fit of immature tantrum. I don't cast them out. Right, that's it. You're moving out. We put up with a lot because we're taking the long view, and we know that they are dealing with their own stuff. And so the living in community exposes you for who you are, and also gives you an insight into God's heart for inclusion of people going through stuff. And we're all going through stuff at some point. And so that's been our base. That led us to connect with churches across the city. So we got involved in a unity movement, bringing churches together. And I want to pick up on something that Steve said about 67,000 expressions of the light. There's one core truth that unites those 67,000 expressions of church belief, and that is that Jesus is Lord. Or you could say, to use the same terminology, Jesus is King. Anyone who doesn't say Jesus is King is not part of the community of light. They might be on their way into it because they're exploring, but the kingdom of light are the people who declare Jesus is Lord. So we can then have a raging argument about whether women should be in leadership, or whether you should have a glass of wine or be teetotal, or whether gay people can be married. You argue that all day long. But if we're agreed that Jesus is Lord and he's present with us while we're arguing, that'll moderate the way we talk, and it'll also remind us of the ultimate truth that, okay, we can violently disagree, but you're still one of his kids, and I'm one of his kids, and we both have to live in this house.
No, that's really good. Well, what you kind of touched on, and I know it's much, much more broad than this, is this vision that started in, let's say, 1987, multiple houses, and it's continued to grow. You talk about, you've invited people into your home. What has been the effect of having this home base, and certainly Liverpool as it relates to the world when it comes to just geographies and people groups and the kingdom? This vision of this home that you find in Liverpool that has expanded out into many other places has really been a sanctuary, it seems like. And I know there's more to it. Can you describe, because I think it's really cool that God would place on the heart of you and your wife long ago and continue this story and grow it in a way that is such a blessing to so many different people? Because I know that there have been hundreds, if not thousands, through your home, sometimes just for a visit while there's, a waypoint, if you will. What's the fruit of that? What's the impact of that? How is that? Obviously, that's enriched your life, but it's so cool that would be a calling and a direction. It's like, that shows to me that God is very specific about the purposes for us and that they all work together. Can you characterize kind of the impact of doing this journey and having this place where people can come through?
Yeah, sure. I think it would be revealing of the emptiness of it all if I said, well, I don't really know, because that would be, I think, a bit lame and a bit empty. On the other hand, I don't want to boast like, well, we're superheroes and everyone's been blessed. I think some people might have learned. We learn sometimes in life, well, I won't do it like that. So maybe we've taught some people that. But, it's just some examples. We've had a lot of young people live with us, people who were maybe working as interns in a job or working for a charity in the city. And so we offered them basically cheap accommodation, but not just a place to live, a family to base themselves in. So my wife's taught numerous young teenage girls and boys, but mainly girls. We've mainly had girls living with us. partly because I've been at work, and so it's more appropriate for her to be supervising young women. And she's taught them to cook and cater. We had a girl who had never done anything more than heat something in a microwave. And sometimes around our table, there'd be 15 people for a meal. And she said to this girl, before you leave in 9 months, she's doing an internship for an academic year, she said, you're going to cook the entire meal for everyone. And this girl just didn't believe her. And I said, well, that can't happen. I can't see it. But she did. Just before she left, she was in charge. She cooked the meal. And it was a nice meal. It wasn't, reheated sausages. And I think discipling people is practical. We didn't just teach them, here's some Bible verses that you'll know by the time you go. Although I must say, Mari had one scripture up that she used to constantly quote to these young people, which is from Hebrews. No discipline is pleasant at the time, but in time, those who are disciplined by it will produce a harvest of righteousness. It got to the point where these teenage girls would say, as soon as she started, right, remember, no discipline, and they'd finish it for her, and they say, yeah, we get it, because discipline doesn't mean a whack on the wrist with a stick or some sort of sanction. It's training. So we've trained a lot of people, and I think some of it is intangible in the sense that people have come from broken families or unhealthy discipline or lack of discipline, and they've just experienced what it is to live in a stable family. Mari and I have been married 36 years. We don't boast about that, but that's the grace of God. People can come and stay and see, well, what would it look like if you stayed with your partner? What would it, and we're honest with people. We tell them when we talk about relationships, we had a time where we thought, this is it, the marriage isn't going to work. I mean, we're just not functioning well. Life isn't just plain sailing. And with children coming along and the pressures of people living with you, sometimes you feel like it isn't working. And the world tells us, well, then just part company. And so part of what we've been able to show people is, no, you persevere, you address problems, you communicate better. And if we can impart, so we've had married couples living with us, and we've been able to just sitting down. I don't mean like a seminar or a therapy session, just chatting, maybe with a glass of wine or sitting over a meal, talking about our experience and pointing people to when you have an argument, don't press the nuclear button. Maybe talk, maybe work it out for the sake of the long term. So I think we've been able to impart a bit of conflict resolution, what it is to be a peacemaker, what it is to live as a family. We're not the best family ever, but we are stable and we're still here. And we've been a refuge for people. We had a woman who had to carefully calculate the moment to flee from her abusive husband with her 3 children. So we were the refuge, because the women's refuge in the city was overflowing during COVID. So she came here and we were her refuge. And now she's reestablished a healthy relationship with her husband, former husband. Her children see their dad. And I'd forgotten that I had a phone in this room, so hopefully it'll stop ringing.
What is that? What's a phone, John?
Phone. This room is the only room in the house with one of those old phones with a little handset connected to a wire in the wall.
Oh my gosh! It's fine. It's nice. Yeah. It's God. He's calling.
Olden days.
Yeah.
And so it's probably a spam caller trying to sell me new windows or insurance.
Yes.
So
keep going.
So they experienced normal home for a brief moment, and that lady was able to establish new life, confidence, friendship, and just have safety for 8 weeks, 3 months. And that gave a basis to talk to her ex-husband with some confidence, not being cowering in the corner. And he realized he didn't control her anymore, so he had to repent of his approach. So I think, but the fruit, obviously, I could say lots on our side. We've built so many friendships. Jesus said, anyone who gives up their home in this life will receive 100 times in this life. And you think, well, what does that mean? If I give my house, will I get 100 houses? But we are living that. I mean, I'm telling you, I could just list countries where I know there are people I could simply call and say, hey, David, we're coming. Can we stay? And he'll either put us up in his home or he'll get a place for us to stay and we can just arrive, And that's not that we want to be freeloaders arriving around the world. The Bible's quite clear about not doing that. But that's like having 100 homes around the world that we don't have to pay the rent on, and we don't have to worry about the maintenance or the insurance. But more than, a home isn't a house. A home is a place where you can be with people, and there are householders leading that household. So some people have got 6 homes, which are actually their home and 5 other houses that are a reflection of the emptiness that they have.
Oh.
So lots of impact. I mean, the Bible says practice hospitality. It's not advice.
You're practicing it.
In doing so, some of you have entertained angels. It's like, ooh, we could have angels in our home. No, that's a promise.
Yeah.
Entertain people and have angels. So I'm convinced that because we practice hospitality, there are angels here. So you come and stay in my house, an angel might lean over you at night and whisper something in your ear that you would not have known if you went anywhere else in the world. And I'm saying, Lord, let those angels speak to me, because one bit of information from them could be the key to some problem we face.
Well, I'm going to shift gears on you, because I know some things that I think would be amazing to get your input on. We talked about kingdom. We talked about, business. You talk about kingdom networks. But I also know, and I think folks might not guess, that you're actually African, and you have a heart for, obviously, the nations, but also how kingdom and what that implication of being kingdom minded with kingdom business, and really how does that, what is the vision and understanding? How can you help people understand what that looks like from a um almost the global scale that you end up seeing things on? Because I know that you're involved in many things across the world in your business and in networking, but also very local in the family. Can you help people understand what is this kingdom thing and how does it manifest itself for you?
Well, I think I'll follow the thread that I think you're pointing at. And I want to, rather than tell folks, here's a wow story, because I think it's a wow story, but here's a gem that everyone can take away right this moment. If God himself, the creator of the universe, the king we're talking about, the one who is the light of the world, pops a piece of revelation information that is for you and your calling, that can come in what appears to be a fragment, like a tiny fragment of gold that you might find when you're panning in a river. But it isn't just that, because it just keeps expanding to fill the available space and inform life. And I'm saying that because this is what I'm about to say can be applied to everybody, everyone that's listening, you, Matt, and me again. We organized a meeting down at the docks in Liverpool about 20 years ago with people from all the nations, people from all 3 corners of the African slave triangle. By that, I mean people from West Africa, people from the Americas, North and South America, and people from Liverpool. And for those who don't know, very quickly, there was a slave trade that ended 200 years ago, but had been going for over a century, where traders from the developed European nations would take ships, get kidnapped people that were treated as commodities in West Africa, load them up, line them up, shoulder to shoulder, like cargo, owned by the ship traders, take them to the Americas, South and Middle and North America, and sell them as a commodity into the slave business to work and produce wealth. And then the commodities that were grown or work done by those same slaves or their predecessors was then traded back into Europe. So that triangle, looking at it from your perspective, went from Europe down to West Africa, across to the Americas, and then brought commodities back to Europe. And the traders, when they were seeking investment for that business opportunity, which was sometimes crowdsourced, and it's really interesting, the history of it all, they would boast that there was a profit to be made on every leg of that triangle. And we took people from each of those corners of continents, and we prayed down at the docks one night for God's redemption in all the pain and damage done there. And in the midst of that, God gave me a momentary vision of a whirlwind in the sky reversing the consequences, which seems extraordinarily and unrealistically big. And my response was, well, how could that even be? And I felt like God just gave me that little gold flake, which started to permeate a lot of thinking. And God started to show me that he wants to do redemptive things in the world that are the opposite of that enslaving trade. And at the root, I mean, I don't want to start preaching to everyone, but the animosity between European people and African people that is brought to a highlight focus with African American people, and I'm talking generally, is rooted in that abusive trade. What if God started to redeem that? And of course, we are the redemptive people. We're not going to go fix it in a human sense, but spiritually, what if we started to go the opposite way? So we Europeans, I don't mean in a pay it back reparation way, but what if we do the opposite? We use our great capital resources and stable nation status to invest backwards down that process. And we're already seeing it. You know, if you think about the opposite of a trader going from Europe to West Africa to enslave people, look what's happening right now. We've got thousands of people coming out of West Africa as evangelists and gospel lead preachers and pastors coming out of West Africa into Europe. Okay, they're called immigrants, but a lot of them are Christians. And so God is smiling, you know, like, well, I'm sending evangelists in exactly the opposite direction. The father nation, the European nation sent traders to enslave. I'm sending some of their descendants
Wow.
to come and liberate you. That's God's grace. That's not people fixing the situation. And I'm standing there as someone who's born as a colonial white guy in this, on the dockside there, saying, Lord, how can I even qualify to be part of that? And I felt like the Lord saying, what do you mean? How can you qualify? No one's qualified. Just do what I'm saying. And God started to open up. Well, if you pursue this without trying to own it, I'll show you what can happen. And I mean, I'll be here another hour telling you some of the things that have happened, but it's been amazing. And
Can you share? Can you just share one story with us? Is there something that you can share that would highlight this?
Well, I'll give you two. One's sort of more spiritual and one's more practical. I felt led to go with a small group of people to Ghana, which is where a lot of the slave trading really, back in the 19th century, really got some traction, or back in the 18th century. And we met for a prayer meeting, supervised by the Archbishop of West Africa. And we prayed for 3 days, including a half day where we just sat, people from 16 West African countries, and Britain, and we asked the Lord to speak. You know, this same thing that Steve would be saying.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Lord? And we just had silent, waiting on God. In that 3 days, we also had just one half day where we just listened to God. And in that, I just felt like the Lord saying, Ghana is the key. Now, that's, you know, that's subjective, needs testing. Maybe I made that up. But what I can tell you is that on the journey to Ghana for that trip, and in every single location I went to in the week prior to that meeting, someone gave me a key or was wearing a key as jewelry. I mean, ladies on reception in the hotel with keys as earrings. The girl that signed us into our first night hotel had a necklace that was 20 little silver keys. I just go on, but it was just like key, 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 key. And I felt really clearly in the prayer meeting, the Lord just was saying, Ghana's the key. That doesn't mean it's the only nation, but there's a key thing happening there. So that was the spiritual thing. And I've since been just watching that unpack. I haven't made it happen, but for the last, that was 2012. And that prayer meeting was on Africa Day. In Africa, all the nations celebrate a day called Africa Day, where they just celebrate being African. Because Africa isn't one nation. That might be a shock to some people, but they do have a commonality, which is being African. And I was born on African soil, so I'm African to that degree. But on Africa Day, we felt like God was saying, I'm going to start showing my authority. That was 2012. And so we've just watched things open up. And I would say to anyone who wants to know where to invest money or where to look for the future, I'm telling you, as much as I can possibly believe it to be true, God is investing in Africa. Something is yet to come out of Africa that the world hasn't seen yet. Even though we despise the disorganization, the corruption, we even look down our noses at poverty and everything that seems to be wrong with Africa. But God's got a plan and it's emerging, and it's way bigger and better than anyone's thinking. So long money, invest in Africa now. Practical, without me soliciting or engineering it, I found myself traveling on a wide-body jet into Ghana and out of Ghana with a African-American bishop and the son of a Liverpool docker, white, an American white guy, and an archbishop of West Africa. And you know, when you get those middle seats and you think, well, I wish I was on an aisle seat, or, you know, those four in the middle of a wide body plane are like the least popular, aren't they? Unless you're going to have an empty row and lie down. But those four people, including me, were sitting in a row. And I was saying, Lord, this is amazing. You know, that you would organize this to underline your point. And practically, we've seen so many business and relationship connections just blossoming. I think with relationships, you don't have to be sort of super spiritual about it. If you're open to relationships and connecting with people, it'll happen. And people think because I was born in Africa that somehow I've been out looking for relationships and trying to connect. I've got friends in many, many African nations. There's 50 African nations, and I've got friends in probably most of them. And I would say I haven't solicited any of them. I haven't gone out like, I need to make a friend in Sudan. I need to make a friend in Uganda. It's just people have connected. You know, pastor came to stayed with us 3 months. He started connecting us with people in other African nations. A girl locally wanted to stay with us because she and her husband were engaged, and she wanted to stay with a family prior to getting married, just for, you know, she wanted to be based in a family rather than single. And she also wanted an appropriate place for the two of them to meet rather than him coming to her apartment, because she felt that was righteous. And so she was from Rwanda. That opened up a whole bunch of relationships in Rwanda. So there are practical outworkings of all of this, but I believe that God is doing something that is going to strike to the heart of the sickness that sets white people and black people against each other. And he is doing it through the cross, through his redemptive nature and purposes. And it's not me. I am not the agent of that. I'm a servant of what he's doing in that. In fact, the Lord spoke to me very clearly. He said, if you try and own this, I'll kill you.
Well, I'm glad you're alive.
And every time I think about it, I think, don't even start owning it, because I like being alive.
Yes. So, let's kind of wrap up with this question. There's some real practical things. I know in the work that you do, there's very specific things but there's an ethos to Live Full and to the work that you do and the approach that you take when it comes to kingdom business and how and where you invest and the essentially kind of I see it like a platform in a way. You know, every time I've talked to you or Michael about these things, it seems like it's definitely a road less traveled, but it's one in which is counterintuitive to this kind of capitalistic, make profits at all cost, but has much more of an impact approach. I think it's becoming much, much more popular because I know when you guys started, you were one of the first ones out there talking about, how do you this impact investing concept, kingdom type of companies. Can you describe that as it relates to what you're seeing happening in the world and that ethos?
Wow, big subject for a wrap up. I'll say this. One time, long time ago, maybe 30 years ago, I was praying, Lord, show me more clarity on my calling. And I felt the Lord say, what's your name? And Manwell. And I felt this part of my calling is wrapped up in my name. That is his sovereign gift. I didn't think of my name. And God wants to see Manwell. And then Michael said to me, that's your brother-in-law, said, hey, John, I've been talking with this company called Live Full. They're based in Atlanta. I think we might be able to work with them. And he was telling me about them. And I said, well, I don't know what the business is like, but I love the name Live Full based on John 10:10. I've come that they might have life and life to the full. And I thought that just resonates with what I feel we're called to see people being made well, or to live well, to live full. So I've always said to Michael, I don't like the word impact because it feels like striking something,
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like God wants to more hug the world and impart love, not impact it. And so always, even though everyone's caught up with this word impact and impact foundations and impact business and all that, I something in me says, well, not impact, maybe serve or help. But also I really believe that it shouldn't be just about charity. There's more and more evidence that just donating and just charitable and not empowering people and enabling them is destructive. I don't want to go into all of that, but there's lots of books out there of the pain that just charity on its own, it patronizes and it leaves people dependent. That doesn't mean you don't care for someone who's hungry or give some shoes to someone who's not got them. I'm all for giving, generosity. I'm with you 100%, Matt. But generosity might mean give time to teach someone to do something, rather than just pay their bills. And so that's what we're about. And Live Full is about creating a platform to deliver real health solutions. And I believe there's a whole agenda out there in the big whatever to not deliver real health, but to deliver a subscription to their slave system and to put bad health out there to keep you sick so that you keep paying. And some good health might not be a product. It might be just, hey, why don't you avoid that and eat less sugar? That'll help you a lot. And there's no one going to make any money out of that. I'm not going to make any money just saying don't eat so much sugar. Stop drinking carbonated drinks and live longer. Well, plenty of companies don't want that to be a viral video.
Right. No, that is so true. And it's amazing to me the fact that you make yourself available. You go back to 1987, you say, hey, what do you want? What do you want from us? And what can we do for you? And how does this all work together? What is the purpose? And I think it's really helpful, John. And this is why I had loved my time with Steve so much too, is that you've been modeling for me, for others in my family, but journeying with us in a way. And I think it manifests itself so well with just a meal, right? You said, you kind of just say it nonchalantly, like, oh yeah, there were 15 people at the table. I don't know anyone besides you who regularly each night is having 15 people at a table. That's a big effort. But there's something about dining with someone, eating with someone, that is there's an element of peace in it. And obviously you could reference a number of things about eating with your enemies, but also this deep sense of transparency that comes with having a meal with folks and really enjoying life. And I just appreciate you, and I appreciate what you do, because and Michael and his immediate family is a great reminder to me to stop, to pause, because it's not just all about just reverse the slave trade, right? These big things, but also that's why I said at the beginning, a very integrated life, that some of the greatest joys are having a glass of wine and sitting for an extra hour and having that conversation at a meal. It's almost like it's a convention that allows us to connect. And so I just appreciate that about you. And it's a model, right? You kind of see it as normal, but it speaks volumes to people like me and to others. So I thank
Yeah.
you for that.
Yeah. Well, everyone could just reflect on this one comment, that if you stop to look at the Bible to check this out, that eating together with someone is the most intimate thing you can do outside of the marriage bed.
It's interesting that you say that. And it's interesting how it's been used also as almost a mechanism of peace, that that you would do this intimate thing and have a meal with someone that you're in conflict with. And there's something about that too. But also there is truth in the vino as well, right?
Yeah, as soon as you relax,
Yeah.
with or without wine. I'm sure there's one or two teetotal people on this call saying, I wish they wouldn't
Sure.
keep talking about wine.
Come
But
on.
there's and perhaps if I said coffee, there's also people who say, well, you should be having caffeine. But that just relaxing with someone and talking openly is an intimate thing. And we often don't do that. And it's in the place where we live that's best done, in normal life. A lot of the modern world in our developed societies is about creating those situations. So people go out of their home to go and have a coffee with someone. Well, why not invite people into your home, even if they are awkward and they may not leave when you want the meeting to be over? People like going to the coffee place because you could say, okay, well, I've got to go now, and you can leave.
Yeah.
It's harder to say to someone, okay, I need to do something else. Will you leave?
It is
our space. We're less available because it's inconvenient. And a lot of love is about accepting inconvenience. People are inconvenienced, Matt. I'm inconvenient.
Yeah. As we wrap this up, and I just thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your perspective and your life. And there's a lot of when I first got into this, I was just doing crypto stuff, right? And now I've kind of reserved Fridays to have these conversations because I started doing that with Steve, and I'm continuing it. I feel like there's a lot of people, and I've been convicted of this recently in the crypto space. There's so much. It's so exciting on one hand because it's all about this decentralized, we're pushing back on these centralized authorities, that you can do things peer to peer, and it feels a lot like freedom, and it feels a lot like making your own choice. But then on the flip side of this, I'm also very convicted by the fact that it is besides it just being highly speculative, it is also something that is manipulated by folks, and there are winners and there are losers, and there's a lot of people when it comes to the money and everything who are looking at it as when Lambo, right? This idea that my life is going to be better if I just had money. And I really feel a heart for, especially 97% men, and they're generally younger than you and me. And I just feel a heart to say, what would John Manwell say to those folks that do listen to this about the perspective of, money, Jesus, all of these things. What encouragement would you have for folks? Because I feel like so many of the folks that are really attracted to crypto are believing that it is the solution for their problems.
Hmm. Well, it's very easy to say to anybody, well, money won't solve your problems. If you really are in financial poverty, money will solve some of your problems. So
Sure.
let's not be over spiritual, or just because I've got enough, I can be glib about that. I think what I would say is, I had a conversation with someone who's very, very high up in the intelligence services, uh, at the highest level in the intelligence services. And that person said to me about 10 years ago, the most important thing that we are aware of at government level is that what's going to shape society in the decades ahead are trust networks, communities who trust one another, for good or bad. And I would say, in all sincerity, to every person, young or old, be part of a trust community. And make sure it's a healthy one. And in that, there is strength. You know, the greatest asset I have in business is colleagues who help me think through complicated stuff, difficult stuff, complicated decisions. And to have confidence in life, to do stuff, to take risks, to work out whether a risk is worth taking, we need that trust network. And it doesn't mean you have to be part of some weird and wonderful tin hat organization. It just means you have to know who are the people you trust. And I would say to everyone, start by asking this question: who are the core 2, 3, 5 people who I really, really trust, that trust me, and that I'm in relationship with? You might think, well, there's so-and-so, I've seen him on internet, on a podcast, I really trust him. That's a fantasy. That could be fake. Who do you really know that you're in relationship with? And build on that. I don't mean use people, but once you've got someone who could really say it as it is, John, here's your strength. Beware of this weakness, John. You've got something to build with. And I'm telling you, out of that, I think that's why Jordan Peterson is doing so well, because he's being honest with people and he's encouraging people to be realistic about their relationships and taking responsibility. But it's hard to take responsibility before you've got the relationships. So build the trust network in your life with healthy relationships, healthy people, and from that will spring opportunities, ideas, and capacity.
That's awesome. John Manwell, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it, and I hope that we can have you on again at some point. But I know it was, I asked this yesterday kind of last minute, and you were so gracious to say that you'd come on. So thanks so much for being on the program.
Wonderful. As I said at the beginning, you always draw interesting stuff out of people and you make me think. So I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, you too. And thank you so much, John. Give Mari our love. We appreciate you so much.
Okay. Well, let's see if someone comes to Liverpool now.
That's right. Yeah. I'll make sure we vet them for you.
I'd like it to be you, Matt, for a start.
Yeah, I know. I would too. You know, I've never been to London. So I'd love to go to London. I'd love to go to Liverpool. I just haven't seen,
Don't worry about London. Come to Liverpool.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Thanks, John.
Okay.
Folks, how cool is it? You know, one of the neat things about doing this program, 94 people watching. Thank you so much for joining. It's amazing. What I love about John too is, you know, what you see is what you get. And what I love about is real people. I feel like when I look at things on the internet and watch it, everyone is putting on a show. And what's so great is, do you have those authentic, trusted relationships in your life? Do you have folks who are willing to maybe speak some hard truths to you. And that's one of the things that really attracted me to this community is when we started getting together, which is exactly what John is sharing, right? Like, we have to eat, we might as well do it together in this community. My first, Hexagon meetups and all of these things we've done in crypto, it's amazing when you go into a group of people who are non-judgmental, right? Like, there's something about this crypto thing, even though it's been difficult for quite some time now, is that there's this hopefulness, but also this willingness to say, you know what, um, we win together. And the that hope, in my opinion, is at the very, very core of what has been some of the most joyful parts of life, which is being in community with people that you can trust. You know, you kind of take the good with the bad because, we end up having, the Twitter fights and all those kind of things. But if you haven't been to these events, and as we get into the bull run here after the halvening, which is coming up in like 7 days, it is the most exciting thing to connect with people of all walks of life who are accepting and willing to accept you for who you are. And that's one of the things I've seen. And I would joke many times that, I've seen more deep, transparent community in crypto than in some of the churches I've been to, because people are always afraid of being transparent. And there's some oversharers in our community. Folks, thanks for joining again. Right Side Up. This is episode number 48 with John Manwell. I hope that it's been a blessing to you, but I just want to encourage you, be inspired to be hospitable, to be transparent, um, to listen and ask Jesus to speak. And he will teach you how to hear him. And it's what a legacy Steve has built and what we continue today. So have a great weekend, folks. It is my favorite week of the year because it is the Masters tournament. So I'm going to have to go check that out. Take care of yourself and don't mess with Texas, right? No one should. Take care.